What's going on, everybody? Gunnar here. Today I'm gonna do a tutorial. I didn't have a tutorial planned, but so I have a friend who was really generous, sent me over a whole bunch of kind of, used and kind of like excess material that he wasn't using. So I kind of owed him a favor, and he called it in. And he wanted to know, kind of like dubbing loops, like Predator dubbing loops, flash hackles and kind of flash hackle blends and some stuff like that. And he specializes in in inline musky spinners and pike spinners. This is obviously kind of a safety pin style, but it's all bucktail and crystal flash, and he's kind of looking to do something different. So today we're gonna do dubbing loops, but big ones, because not everybody's got a dubbing brush table, and there's some things you got to do differently. Because so a dubbing brush table, it's level, the loop is open, so I can put everything in, I can make it really complex, I can build my bulk throughout the brush, close it, spin it up super tight, have a ton of pressure on that so it's super durable, and then palmer that. But if you don't have that, it's really hard to build the bulk into the brush because it's a lot of material, it becomes really dense. And when you do a dubbing loop, the whole point of the loop is you want it spaced out, you want it nice and thin so that you can palmer it really tight and get an aggressive kind of water push to it, and you want to trap each individual fiber around your thread. If you start trapping 4 or 5 fibers, they'll easily kind of pull out, right? So the whole point is sparseness, lightness, being able to distribute that evenly, and we're going to build 2 material dam systems to overlay our dubbing loops. Instead of trying to build the bulk in the brush, we're going to make kind of like a material dam, kind of how you would do an intruder, and then we're going to wing material off of it. So I was experimenting with different dubbing loops, and I came up with a pattern like 20 minutes ago. So actually I'm quite fond of this fly. I've been looking at it ever since I finished it. It's got a really nice silhouette, super light, kind of clean bulk, high contrast eye, it's all fluorescent. So maybe that'll be something in the future, but don't take away the pattern from this, just we're talking dubbing loops, that's the point. So don't worry about the fly, but just dubbing loops. Cool, so here's the bug. And I got nothing special going on kind of hook wise. We're just going to use 2 2-aught B10S stinger hooks from Gami. Yeah, just because I was playing with this stuff, and so I just kind of wanted to use some hooks that I had a little bit of extra. And you can use whatever thread. I'd recommend a nice high strand, like a 100 strand maybe, gel spun, or a 150 actually. I've been really enjoying the 150s. This is like a 140 power thread because I ran out of gel spun, and it'll be here today. So first thing first, start your thread. I'm gonna come in and do our first material dam, our first kind of bulk system. And what this material is it's strung fuzzy fiber from Hedron, and you don't need a lot of it because we're gonna cut this into like 1/8 or something, and that has a few purposes really. It's what it's going to do is it's going to help lift this material off the hook shank, so as we palmer it, we kind of have this nice core, and it's going to teardrop around itself. Basically is what it's going to happen. That way this dubbing loop system doesn't just simply collapse, right? And I talked about how it's kind of hard to build bulk into a dubbing loop, especially when you're using really long kind of coarse materials. So yeah, this is kind of the way around that. Actually, that length is good. So I think that's 1/4 to half, something like that. And I'm just going to put a little bit of taper into this so it's nice, kind of uneven lengths, but I still want to be able to trap that down. And then we're just going to mash this kind of on top of the hook, which is going to help distribute that. And we'll tie that down. I think it's quite surprising how many bucktail techniques you can use on other fibers, and it's extremely beneficial. Kind of just like slipping stuff around the hook like that. I'm just going to tag my thread with some glue here, make sure that these inner wraps are secured, got some good pressure on them, and then we're just going to reverse tie that like you would bucktail, and that's how we're going to get our bulk. You can see how that stiff synthetic, it doesn't want to lay back, right? You can reverse tie that just like bucktail, and we're going to use that as a material dam. to flare this first dubbing loop. And I'm not too worried about how clean that looks because it's all going to get covered up anyway. Normally I'd probably hit all this with, well, actually I'll hit all this with glue. So yeah, one of the things I really like about doing a dubbing loop is the spinner I like to use. I like to use a really kind of non-aggressive spinner that has kind of a more controlled rate to it that I can do a little bit at a time. So what I just did is I drew my thread away from the hook, wrapped it around my finger, creating a loop. A few wraps, threw my thread around the loop to create a nice pinched V so that it's nice and tight up against the hook right there. And then I'm just going to bring my thread forward. Stick my dubbing twister in there. This is it's a Rising tool. It's from Rising, but it's Gallup's kind of shepherd hook dubbing needle and bodkin. 2-in-1. It's a 2-in-1. So for our dubbing loop now, I'm using a non-wax thread. If you're using a gel spun, it's going to be non-wax. I'd always recommend adding some wax. This is just some Orvis premium dubbing wax. And what I like to do, so I have a pretty long loop, maybe 8 inches, right? I'm going to put that on the first 4. And that's about it. Just one clean dab, first 4. I want to leave the back 4 open so I can get my materials into the loop and then slide them up into the wax. That way when I'm bringing them in, they're not getting caught on a whole bunch of stuff. And then this loop for the back is going to be a full length microlon, which is a really thin, like 70 denier nylon strand. And it's just going to help add saturation to the Flashaboo. And then I'm using all this at full length, and then we're going to come in with some gold holographic Flashaboo, some yellow holographic Flashaboo, quite high densities. This is a nice flashy pike fly. But I'm just pinching this, pinch and twist, comb it out, right? Apply that twist backwards, pinch and twist, comb it out. Apply that backwards. So I'm going to add quite a bit of taper, maybe 2 or 3 inches, but again, I want that to be nice and kind of stable in my dubbing loop. I don't really want it to fall out or anything finicky like that. And then I'm going to start spreading this out in the air so I have a little bit of a wide base. Come in, open that loop, draw your fingers in, and walk that now up into the wax. Cool, so our dubbing loop. I don't do dubbing loops very often. This is not really in my comfort zone, but I'm going to make it work. So I'm going to shove this stuff up here towards the head. And then I'm just going to make this nice, thin, picked out, light, so that we can individually trap every single fiber. Now when you start spinning, make sure these fibers are all straight. I like to lift, oh, you guys can't see that. You can see my bodkin right here. I like to lift that up. So as I start spinning, the fibers fall into each other instead of falling on the thread, which gets really annoying. And then you want to pull on it with some good tension so that the twist is applied throughout the brush. If you spin it with slack tension, it'll bunch up on you. And I'm just going to spin it nice and slow. And once that starts to get some momentum behind it, then I just want to keep that momentum going so that the core doesn't get super tied down and trapped. After a few turns, you just stop and pick it out. So this is, you can come in and use a bodkin too. This is just a hair comb from like Walmart. But it's easier, in my opinion, to comb this out even maybe 3 or 4 times while you're doing this process, getting a nice tight kind of seal on these materials, 3 or 4 times throughout the process than it is to trap a whole bunch of fibers and then try to come in at the end and comb it all out. I find this to be far more effective, far more efficient, and I get a kind of a cleaner result that I can kind of use all the time. If you just come in at the end, it'll be a mess, it'll take a long time, and when you pull out Flashaboo that's trapped, if you pull on it too hard, you kind of like plastically deform the material. Same with the microlon, and it'll kind of like knot and coil and break and do weird things. So it's way simpler to just do multiple comb throughs as you're building the loop. So that's, we're gonna come in. I feel like that's done, but what you want to do is you just want to come in tight to the hook shank, because these fibers are going to have the least amount of pressure on them. And find one, just give it a little tug, make sure it's not slipping on you. And if it doesn't slip, you're more or less good to go. Now palmering this can get a little tricky just because all these materials are going to want to fight you. So I like to have a glass of water off to my left, and then you take that and apply that water to the material to tame it down so they all stick together, so that when you start wrapping this, it's way easier to control it. And I'm going to do this rather nice and tight. We have a nice kind of sparse dubbing loop, and one of the things about having a sparse dubbing loop, because the more times you can wrap that around the shank, the cleaner look you're going to get. If you do it all kind of bunched up all at the head of your dubbing loop, right, and you only get 2 turns, well, if part of your brush is denser or you don't have your materials kind of laid out in a nice even fashion, you're going to see that, you're going to notice it when you palmer that around the hook. Whereas if you do, you know, a nice long sparse brush and you get to palmer that 10 times, it's kind of like a, you know, I don't know the principle, but it's you get a really nice distributed, random kind of orientation, and so you get a nice, clean, filled out look that's evenly distributed because you had a nice sparse brush, and it hides your mistakes, I suppose, would be a safe way to say it. Not that, you know, you necessarily made mistakes, but it'll do a good job of hiding your mistakes. So we have this nice teardrop core. It's going to help push water. That fibers, when they dry out, they'll get a little bit bulkier, but they're not going to collapse because we have that strung fuzzy fiber. We have the microlon for a nice amount of saturation, so that it's not solely flashaboo back here, but it's nice, light, synthetic. It's not going to absorb any water. And then we obviously have the nice kind of flash hackle. So I'm going to hit that with some glue, and then we're going to articulate this guy. Now the front is going to use a different material dam system. We're going to use the strung fuzzy fiber paired with 1/4 inch body tubing, and then I'm going to do a flash hackle of strung fuzzy fiber to do the collar. And that strung fuzzy fiber is like a synthetic wool material that's rather viscous, but it doesn't absorb water, and it's rather pushy. It's going to move a lot of water, so it's really going to animate that back hook having a really kind of dense S-crinkle synthetic right up at the head like that. And it's a nice long enough fiber that it extends past the fish mask, so that I'm not trapping all of my you know, kind of viscous material. A lot of times when you put a fish mask over a fly, if you have it hides your viscous material, so you want your collar underneath the fish mask to extend outside of that collar, so that has water drag and it has water push outside of the fish mask kind of position. So something I noticed, you guys might find this interesting, I switched dubbing wires, not intentionally, just because I had a gift card somewhere. And this wire is twisted, and the other wire I was using was twisted, but not to the same extent. So when I tie in a non-twisted wire, and you'll just have to tie it in and see what happens, but when I tie in a non-twisted wire, I pin it directly to the side, like exactly on the side, bottom eighth, run it up top eighths, it's perfectly flat, and I have a nice clean vertical loop. You can see that in quite a few of my tutorials. It's all done on the side of the hook. But I switched up to just a different wire brand, and I noticed that as soon as I tried to do that, the twist, it flipped sideways on me. So when you have a twisted wire, you want to put it directly on top, because the twist will reorient itself kind of mid-air behind your hook. And you'll see this is running directly on top, and I have a really nice, clean, perfectly vertical loop. Right? So just play with the wire. Not all wires are going to be the same. This is like a 49 strand, 40 pound nylon coated wire. If you switch brands and one's got more twist than the other, all you got to do to fix that is change the position you tie it on, either directly on top or directly on the side. So just be aware of that, because I know a few tires, they all, you know, they're either tied directly on top or directly on the side, and it depends on the wire. So you have to change your approach depending on the material you use to get the nice vertical loop. So if you don't have a vertical loop, just retie it. You know, don't move on until you have that nice clean vertical loop, because it's going to affect how the back hook articulates with response to the front hook's water push, right? So, cool. We got that going on. I'm going to come up here. I'm actually going to measure this off a fish mask. And I want, yeah, that's about good. That's where I'm going to put my body tubing. So my body tubing is going to hit kind of like the back edge of my fish mask. You can kind of see like where the opercular would be. Like this outside edge is where I'm going to attach my 1/4 inch body tubing. And so we're going to use this with the same amount of strung fuzzy fiber, which is going to extend back about halfway down that wing. And if it doesn't, you can taper it so that it does. That way we have our water bulk and our push occurring at a place where it's going to help animate that back hook. You want to overlay your fibers in a certain way so that the push of water animates the back hook, right? If you have that too close to the front hook or too far back, then that push of water is not going to be used to the full effect, because that water is going to hit this really dense collar, move out, and then you want it to recollapse on that tail. When it recollapses, that's when you get the wavelength coming back onto the back of the fly. If you have it pushed out and it comes back too soon, then it's not going to be animated. If it comes back too late, then I kind of like the swimming action to be kind of like this back, I don't know, back half to back third. You know what I mean? I don't want it too far forward, but I don't want it too far back. It's a fine line, ladies and gentlemen. So that fits on there, nice, clean, perfectly. I have enough room for a head dam or a thread dam so that the mask doesn't slip off. Yeah, coming back in. So we're going to use our strung fuzzy fiber kind of the same way I used Flashaboo minnow body on the Chunky Dunker tutorial. So I'm going to come out and I'm going to use, I don't know, maybe 20% more than I did on the back hook, just so I have more density, more bulk up front, a little bit more water push, and this is going to help cover that connection and bridge that gap to the back, right? So we're going to half that, then we're going to half the half. So you can see right now I kind of have like the perfect length, and I'm just going to put a little bit of taper into that. It's quite hard to do actually. A little bit of taper. And then leaving it nice and long. This is one of those weird things you got to play with, but I'm just going to drape that up and around that hook. Take a nice loose thread wrap and wrap that backwards and trap all that. And then I'm going to walk that around and make sure that it's evenly distributed. See, this is exactly like working with bucktail. There's a lot of stuff. If you work with bucktail a lot, you'll be good to go for a lot of different synthetics. And then I'm just going to take a pen tool or your fingers and really force that backwards. But because that body tubing's flaring that, I'm not too worried about reverse or, you know, kind of hollow tying it. I'm just going to trap all that down, and those short fibers are going to create a nice short little water push right there, and then bleed into the long fiber. So I have a little bit of taper going on, which is, it's nice. Has a good effect to it. Now most of this is going to be covered by the fish mask, so I don't have to worry about gluing any of this, which is nice because it saves you quite a bit of time. So again, I didn't really show you guys on the back hook, so I'll show you on the front hook. You take your bobbin, make sure that all of this is in frame, I suppose. I don't know how I'll do that. You want to pull that away, loop your finger inside the bobbin, reattach that to your hook. Then you can go 1 or 2 times around your thread. I don't really think it matters. No one's ever showed me a difference. But the loop around your thread makes it so you have a nice tight V, so that you have something to kind of pinch your materials to right up at that hook shank. And then you just wrap that up to wherever you're going to tie that off, which in our case is right about there. And then the dubbing wax, again, I'm going to put kind of at the top 4 inches where my materials are going to be, so I can slip stuff into the back without collecting wax, and then slide it up into where I need it to be positioned to be spun. So you all already know how to do this one for the back hook. I'm going to do the head with a dubbing loop of strung fuzzy fiber, so I'll keep you guys for that one. But basically I'm just going to do it at about 70% length so that I get the taper that I'm looking for. So Flashaboo Microlon, 70% length, 25% more fibers, building our silhouette and density as we move forward into a strong fuzzy fiber head and collar. You could certainly do all of this without the Microlon. I just like adding it because it adds, I know I keep saying saturation, like when I want the bug to be profiled. Do you know what I mean? Like when you see it from a distance, I want enough material that there is a distinct silhouette and a specific color combo. That is what I kind of define saturation as. And when you do just Flashaboo, it's all stranded. Right? Now if you do enough of it, you can obviously create a silhouette, but that's oftentimes unnecessary. By using the Microlon, I can create the color I want, the silhouette I want, with using less flash. And it's also going to help kind of create a barrier, similar to like how you would, you know, Ulf Hagstrom talks about this a ton when he's doing, when he's layering Flashaboo on top of bucktail and things. You want a nice kind of thin synthetic between your bucktail and your Flashaboo so that you create a buffer zone so the Flashaboo doesn't fall through the material. And this is kind of stranded just like bucktail. Your Flashaboo would easily fall through this and lose some of that profile. By combining it with the Microlon, it just kind of saves you a step of adding the buffer zone. The buffer zone is built into the dubbing loop. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm saying saturation, blah blah blah. And that's why I'm using this kind of thin nylon material within, obviously, all of my Flashaboo. So this is quite a bit denser, nice and spread out. Gonna give that just kind of a little bit of width to it and slide that into the back half of my brush here. And then walk that up, right? You can use your fingers, walk that up into the wax, way up towards the head, and now that's trapped 50-50, not sliding out. And I can start to position this so that I have a nice, sparse, evenly distributed loop that I can wrap and palmer nice and tight, and I can individually trap each fiber so that it's extremely durable and they're not going to get pulled out of there. Something I'd recommend when you go to do a flash hackle, if you want it to look nice and clean and be even in density, to bring it down onto the hook shank so that you can get more turns around a thinner diameter kind of substrate, which is going to help give you a more even kind of look to it. And yeah, that's what I have to say about that. Cool, so we basically just have a Flashaboo fly with a really nice silhouette. That's basically what we got going on. Nice, sparse, bulky, cool. So all we're going to do is come in to do the head. We're going to do another dubbing loop, make this one maybe a little bit shorter. And this dubbing loop is going to be using strung fuzzy fiber to do our collar, right? And it's a little bit of a stiffer material. I wouldn't have to mess with this if I would have put my loop twister in there. It's a little bit stiffer material, so you just want to make sure you go nice and slow. You're going to want to pick it out a few extra times so you get a nice kind of clean collar, but it's a nice fluorescent, again, synthetic wool, really viscous kind of water push material. So I'm going to come in, cut it in half, and then instead of cutting it perfectly in half again, I'm going to cut it like 70-30 so that I have long fiber, short fiber. And then I'm going to taper my long fibers, and these are going to be our collar fibers. I forgot to hit this with some dubbing wax. I'm going to come in with the longer fibers, the 70% length fibers, and put these guys bunched up way up at the head, and these are going to be our collar. Then I'm going to taper these guys, and these are going to be kind of like our fish mask fillers, and it's going to create our nice forward leaning kind of silhouette that I like. Make sure, especially with coarse fibers, you want them distributed nicely because they'll have a greater tendency to pull up because they're a little bit thicker than your Flashabou, they're a little bit thicker than your Microlon. And because we don't have a lot of hook shank to work with, if I can do this nice and thin, I can get a whole bunch of really tight turns and build a really tight head that's going to be durable and really fill that fish mask. So you can see that's all strung fuzzy fiber up in there. Again, lifting my bodkin so that it doesn't get trapped around the thread super tight. I got my main body all clamped down so I'm not tangling fibers. Then shortly into this process, I'm going to come and hit this with a comb to get some of the bigger loops. When you pick out a dubbing loop, it actually adds tension to the core. You'll get a tighter core the more you pick this out. Just help increase your durability. Then you come in with a little bit of Velcro or something. Make sure this is picked out right tight to the core. Throw a few more wraps on there. This is a sweet way to do like a synthetic Buford or something like that. If you want to use a nice kind of pushy synthetic head. My camera decided I had been recording too long. So, just walking that forward. Now I have a really nice, dense, synthetic water pushing head that's not going to absorb any water, yet it's going to be able to add, you know, a nice viscous collar to help push water, slow down the front of the fly, allow that tail Flashabou fly to articulate and kick off to the side, and it's going to help that back hook swim with all that water push right here at the front. So that is a no-name fly, so that we could talk about flash hackles and dubbing loops. So that's what I got for you. I'm just going to slip, I have a couple old fish masks that I've been waiting to use that aren't flexible, some of the old, a lot of the older brands. I'm going to pin that on there. And then finish that in place. I like to put nice thread dams in front of these so they can't slip off instead of kind of like trying to epoxy the whole thing on there. Just doing a thread dam in front and then epoxying the gape of the fish mask and then around the edge has been the best for keeping that in place for me personally. So that is an articulated dubbing loop fly, basically, is all it is. Super simple, light, 100% synthetic, bulky. See if I can back that out for you guys into autofocus. But that's what I'm talking about. That's where the Pike are at right there. Super simple, easy, kind of quick. A lot of that, I mean, the whole front hook's completely protected under that fish mask between that body tubing. You got a whole bunch of nice, dense synthetic dubbing brushes, which are going to be a lot less prone to kind of bite off and wearing down. So, got a really slick, articulated, probably an 8-inch little Flashabou deceiver type deal. So, thanks for watching. Hopefully that helps you out. If you got any questions on kind of dubbing loops or anything like that, let me know. I don't use them often, but I use them enough to have some pointers for you. So. Hopefully you enjoyed that and learned something and got a takeaway, and best of luck tying. Cheers.